Welcome to the Bitcoin Infinity Show. Today, I am speaking to one of my heroes, Jon Atack, a Bitcoin core developer who I wouldn't be here without him. So, hello, Jon.
Hey, how you doing?
Instead of doing the regular letting Jon tell the world who he is, I'm going to give you a story about who I am, and it's going to lead in nicely to this conversation here. So I started studying Bitcoin in 2016, where I took an online course at the University of Nicosia, and Andreas Antonopoulos was one of the teachers. And then I started writing about it on Medium in 2017. One of the articles about how to take control over your private keys when the whole Bitcoin Cash hard fork happened went sort of semi-viral. So I kept on writing, and I compiled these articles into a book. And then that was the only book that I had to my name. And I wasn't very happy with it. So in late 2018, I figured I should write a proper book about Bitcoin. And I promised myself to write a page a day for the entirety of 2019. And as a New Year's resolution, right? And as with all New Year's resolutions, you break them after a while. And I broke mine after 106 days. And what came out of that was a book called Sovereignty Through Mathematics. It's my first proper Bitcoin book. It looks like this, or it looked like this, rather. Nowadays, it's been slightly re-edited and redesigned and looks like this. And I published it in June, or I think in June or May or June, and nobody gave a crap. No one read the book. Nothing happened with it. I published the first chapter on Medium, I believe, and there Jon happened to find that chapter, and he really liked it, but he thought my writing was kind of crap. And Jon is a multilingualist who speaks like 7 languages fluently and is very good with grammar and stuff. And the AI wasn't a thing back then. It's also a thing to know. Grammarly wasn't invented yet and so on. So Jon started helping me rewrite the book to make it better. And he also had a lot of technical knowledge and expertise and could point out where I was wrong and just make the whole thing a whole lot better. And after that, I took 50 books, 50 of these paperbacks I brought them in my hand luggage to Baltic Honey Badger in Riga, the OG conference. And I sold 25 of them for cash, on-chain, and Lightning payments, and I gave the other 25 away to Bitcoiners that I liked. And after that, the book sort of started to take off, and it got a life of its own, and I got a lot of new contacts, and a lot of good things happened. Eventually, Michael Saylor put it on his hope.com website when he got onto the scene. I got a very surprising DM from Saylor saying that he read the book and really liked it. And that would not have happened hadn't it been for Jon Atack. So a deep, warm welcome to this show, Jon. I have been wanting to tell this story since 2019 because you haven't been properly given proper attention to all the work you put into this book. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for everything you did there.
Yeah, 7 years later.
Yeah, exactly. And the story doesn't end there, though. I'm going to babble on for a bit longer here because we had conversations from May to August in 2019. That's when we worked on the book, and you devoted quite a bit of time to it and really did the work. But then all of a sudden, at one of the very last chapters, I think the very last chapter actually, you suddenly pulled out and you said some things that were sort of surprising to me. And I'm going to read from a DM here. While I understand, this is Jon talking. While I understand very well the ideas you express in it and can relate to them as someone who is also on the spectrum, it is too unnuanced, too unbalanced, and too unpolitically correct to risk putting my name to it, particularly for any potential open source sponsors in San Francisco and New York City. This is the sort of content that has nothing to do with my work on Bitcoin and could be damaging in the same way it was for James Damore. Do you remember? I hope people remember James Damore. He was the whistleblower about the DEI stuff in Google, right? If I remember correctly. So what happened there? Where were you? And what led up to you pulling out and not wanting your name on my book?
So I guess that is an interesting segue into our discussion. I think that was, you said in August 2019. So I had been trying to learn to work on Bitcoin Core and contribute to Bitcoin Core starting in February of that year. And we can backtrack to that and discuss how that actually went down, what happened during that time, because it was a very interesting time of change. But I had come back from spending 2.5 weeks in the month of June in New York City in the offices of Chaincode Labs. And I realized that it was probably better for me, as I was at that time non-funded and working more or less full-time for free, trying to contribute to Bitcoin for free. In other words, without any sort of support of any kind. And I was no longer working as in my previous role of freelance software engineer, very, very well paid one at the time before. And so I was concerned about my ability to get funding. And at the time, pretty much my only task to get funding at that point, where it was clear that I was not going to be funded by Chaincode Labs, my only other real option was the newly announced creation of Square Crypto by Jack Dorsey, led by Miles Suter, who I did recommend to Miles that he select Steve Lee as the first manager of the new initiative. And that is, in fact, it could be just a coincidence, but in fact, Steve Lee was the first hire. But my only real chance to have funding at that time, and there were very few other funding organizations, was really to convince Steve Lee. And so I needed to keep my profile as uncontroversial as possible at a time when there was a strong push for other types of profiles and identities than mine for developers. And we can get to that later if we need to. I don't hear you, Knut.
Yes, I got a tweet here from Matt Corallo back in April 2018, where he says it's long since time the Bitcoin community spent a ton more effort on recruiting and ensuring underrepresented groups, parenthesis, including women and especially folks with a different background, and parenthesis, feel welcome in the community. So I think this is sort of a start of the DEI culture coming into Bitcoin Core, right?
I think I missed that tweet in 2018, but I did see the same person launched a series of tweet storms in May of 2019, about 3 months after I had been trying to more or less full-time become a Bitcoin Core contributor. That was my one goal. And so it was very clear to me which way the wind was blowing, and even the way the process with Chaincode Labs took place. I had been planning for years to contribute to Bitcoin Core since maybe 2016, when around 2015 or 2016, I don't recall exactly, Vladimir van der Land, then a longtime lead maintainer of Bitcoin Core, began to follow me on Twitter, and to my surprise, and so I began to follow Vladimir's work on Bitcoin Core, and I very much liked the kind of leadership style that I saw. To my mind, that was the best leadership of an open source project that I had seen, and I had spent considerable time, a number of years, working on open source in other areas, and I wasn't pleased with the leadership style. And so Vladimir's style appealed to me immensely and basically inspired me to consider Bitcoin Core as my next path in life. And at the same time, my work environment, I was doing a lot of ass staving, high profile staving missions for large multinationals in Europe. When they would get caught with a bad choice of software team to implement something key and critical for them. And so they would call a very small number of people, and I was on that list, the sort of top little elite in France where I was, to go and fix things for them and save them against time and against space. And the costs would usually be rather a bit higher than with the Indian and Ukrainian and wherever subcontractors they had been working with before that caught them in the hot water. And so that was getting a bit well, a bit woke. And woke isn't really my thing. And I thought both at the same time, I had been saving in Bitcoin for years and believing in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin spoke to me. And I felt like the cypherpunk ideals of Bitcoin meant that maybe I would be moving towards a team that would be grizzled, graybeard sea hackers. And I thought this was perhaps the place where it's still going to be a bit safe from the encroachment of I don't like to use the word woke or even DEI, but critical. There was critical race theory. There was all these radical left theories that I had glimpsed during my university days, even way before, and they terrified me, to be honest. I never thought they would go anywhere, but they did. They slowly, as we all know now, in took over terrain in the academic circles and institutional circles, and then it sort of exploded during the mid 2010s, more or less. And that's what I was fleeing. And I was thinking, okay, Bitcoin seems to be a place where I can maybe avoid this nonsense. And that turned out to be wrong, because just as I started working really full time and stopped doing my previous work to dedicate myself to Bitcoin Core, it came to Bitcoin Core as well.
Yeah, and so the people funding Bitcoin Core developers at the time, the two companies that come up as Brink and Chaincode Labs, right?
Brink did not exist yet. Brink
did not exist, so it's Chaincode Labs first.
Brink came about 2 years later.
Yeah, I'm getting it wrong here, but Chaincode Labs is a private company, right?
I believe the two founders of Chaincode Labs, they ran a high frequency trading firm, I believe, called Hudson River Trading or something similar. Yeah. And that allowed them, I believe, to have the means to dedicate part of their very lovely offices in a New York skyscraper to improving Bitcoin. And for years, both Suhas and Marcos, I forgot his first name, were working on Bitcoin as software engineers as well. Alex Marcos.
Yeah. I mean, around the same time here as Corrallo's tweet in 2018, Adam Jonas comes to the scene, who is a guy that was taught at a school called the Flatiron School in New York, a coding boot camp that was started in 2012, I believe.
Yeah, very iconic building in New York. The thing is, so I'm not sure, but at the time, Jonas, he prefers to be called Jonas, and not Adam. Jonas was, I believe, relatively new to Chaincode Labs. He came just before that residency. John Newberry, I believe, began working at Chaincode around 2017. And so in 2018 or late 2018, perhaps the very early 2019, or perhaps earlier, Jonas was hired. But, John was very, very, very active. He had a lot of energy. He was creating a lot of initiatives. Not only was he very prolific as a contributor to Bitcoin Core, he also created the residency. He created Bitcoin Optech, which was the newsletter, as well as the enterprise outreach for getting them to move to using Taproot and understanding Taproot. He later created the Bitcoin Core PR Review Club in early 2019 as well, which I co-maintained with him for the first 2 years. And then he later created Brink with Jonas. So John Newberry created the Bitcoin Core Review Club, created or co-created Bitcoin Optech, co-created, but was the main name attached to Brink in 2021. As well as, I think, the person behind the residency idea at Chaincode. And the 2019 summer residency was very ambitious. They were selecting about a dozen people to spend 3 months in Manhattan, fully housed, all costs covered, as well as receiving, I think, around $8,500 per month to work, basically to dedicate themselves to Bitcoin for 3 months to see. It was very ambitious and very well funded. And it only ever happened once.
Yeah, the reason I mentioned this school that he came from is that they were very into the DEI thing. On their website, there's explicit like race and gender gated fellowships, BLM era, DEI task force.
I mean, New York City, academia, What do you want?
Yeah. No, but just to mention that this is, I mean, it was in full bloom back then, right? They had Feelings Friday. What is a Feelings Friday?
We
Like,
had reading.
he must have taken that with him from there then.
Yes, he did. So
what is a Feelings Friday?
I mean, I think it was just where people were encouraged to become vulnerable and express what they were happy and maybe not so happy. I don't remember exactly. It was sort of a circle. We all went around. I think it made people both feel good, and maybe it was a form of bonding, but it was also vulnerability and sharing. I wasn't entirely comfortable with it because, well, I don't know. It's not like a bro kind of thing, definitely. Not that I'm a bro kind of person either, but it's just, I don't know. I don't know how do you behave in a situation like that? I mean, as someone who's maybe a tiny bit on the spectrum, I wasn't the most comfortable I could be.
No, and I imagine a lot of developers to be sort of more introverted than extroverted, and maybe not this.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm only happy working alone. I can't get things done well working in an office with a bunch of people around me. That probably was how most Bitcoin Core developers were, and that is no longer the kind of Bitcoin Core developers we have today, perhaps, because most of them are now in offices. So either they're all miserable as I would be if I was in office, or maybe they actually like it, or could be a bunch of nuances in between. But that has completely changed. But back to Chaincode. So I'm hesitant to discuss John Newberry too much because I owe him a lot of gratitude in a way, because my first contact with Jonas was an interview for the residency where he basically told me in the first 3 or 5 minutes that I would not be going further in the selections. This was in early March 2019 because they were looking for long-term contributor material and I didn't fit the bill. What I did not realize at the time was how I did not fit the bill. And I do believe, based on what I saw afterwards, that they were looking for certainly younger, perhaps less independent, more malleable, moldable, maybe more compliant or willing to be in an office. I was an experienced, independent, mature adult, and I had responsibilities, I had mortgages, I had things to pay for. And so I didn't fit the bill. And I believe now that ultimately we're looking for something. They had a specific mission in mind. To put it gently, I believe that their idea was that Bitcoin Core should professionalize and become a bit more like Google and corporatize, and offices and professional people who otherwise would have gone to Google was sort of the idea, I think. And I think there was a more specific idea as well in the minds of people like John, who created the residency, and Jonas, who was hired by John to help co-run the residency, and Jonas was running the interviews. So I was rejected. And there are only 2 funding organizations in all of Bitcoin that have rejected me over the past 7 to 8 years. And that was, first one was Chaincode, and later on, the next one was Brick. But, and all the other ones I'm very grateful to have said yes. So, but I didn't fit the bill without even knowing more about me based on more or less who I was. So things that I probably couldn't change about myself. And then John, to his credit, saw that I was doing more reviewing and commits on core than probably half to all of the rest of the group combined over the next 2 months. They were meeting together 2 or 3 times a week online, preparing for the residency during spring of 2019. Me, I was at home in France working on Bitcoin Core without any supervision whatsoever. And I was starting to rack up the reviews as best I could as a new contributor, learning, reviewing, and then I started getting some commits. Jonas did say to me, look, we don't know you. You should get some commits. Maybe you should do a podcast. You should get your name out there. All I wanted to do was work on core. I didn't care about being famous, playing the fame game. And that's basically how I've done it for the last 7 years. I didn't really, that was a mistake. Fame is very helpful, and more so in El Salvador, in fact, but in general. but yet I believed that my work would speak for itself, and it did. And within 2 or 3 weeks, I got a call from Chaincode Labs, and it was basically Jonas saying, "Hey, John Newberry has watched what you've been doing, and he would like to know if you want to speak with him." And I said, "Sure." And basically, John encouraged me and said, "You should be more ambitious, aim higher. You could do this. Keep going." And so I did. And then late May, right around the time when the Blue Mat was writing about diversity in DEI, they did call me back and say, "Hey, you're kicking ass more or less. You want to come to New York City?" So the rejection turned into a come participate even though you're not in the full program and getting your costs covered, and you're not going to earn $8,500 a month. But I was still invited to come for 2.5 weeks to the Bitcoin part of the residency, the Bitcoin seminar before they would roll their sleeves and work every day in the office. And so I covered my costs of travel, and I did go, and they did place me in an apartment in Queens with the other residents. They called themselves residents, the Resies. And it was a very interesting experience in many ways. I did come out of it a bit depressed. I can explain why, but yeah. And so my experience was John was very helpful to me, and I'm very reluctant to. My goal is not to, and I've always been reluctant to come out with the other things I know because I'm grateful.
There's a lot of nuance here, and of course, people have different political opinions and stuff. I'm just very interested in the connection between wokeness and moral relativism. And I think like for Bitcoin plebs, they are mostly, I mean, they're leaning towards freedom values and anarcho-capitalism and such things, which is something I don't see in shitcoiners at all. And if I look at Brink's sponsors here, for instance, you have Coinbase and you have Sapo Bank, the Draper Foundation, and Marathon, and OKX and Nexo and all.
Well,
BlockFi and Gemini.
At the time, there were very few funders, and to be frank, Sapo was one of the only other organizations willing to fund Bitcoin Core developers. They were funding Anthony Towns, H.A. Towns at the time, and OKX was also one of the few that was willing to fund and did fund for a time. And Coinbase said they would, but they never really did it well, and they were pretty flaky, and they left some core developers out to dry, all of a sudden cutting off the funding, if I remember correctly. So Coinbase was never very good about fulfilling their promise to support developers on Bitcoin, open source developers. But OKX did, Sapo did, and I'm uncomfortable with some of the criticisms. Yes, there may be shitcoiners funding, but as far as I have seen, and you have to be fair, I have never ever felt any coercion in any way. Maybe I was lucky, but I don't believe I've heard it. I haven't heard it from others either. People telling them to. I think that sort of coercion happens more in terms of soft power, soft influence, friendships, social friendships, time hung out together. Not so much because your funder asks you to. I've never heard of a funder putting strings on their grant.
No,
but apart from doing work.
No, and I don't believe there's a direct, like, I'm not accusing anyone of being corrupted directly and getting a bag of money for doing corrupt things, but
no, if there is corruption, and corruption with quotes, I don't want to overuse air quotes, but if there is sort of that sort of thing going on, it's on a social level.
Yeah, but that's sort of what I'm getting at. Like, is there a problem if the funders are shitcoiners, and then probably not as freedom oriented, and like not they might. I don't think anyone at Kraken sees Bitcoin as important as a Bitcoin maximalist does. If you think that these other things have value too, and
actually Kraken had a very base founder. Jesse Powell was based.
Yeah, maybe that's a bad example. Yeah,
yes.
And I'm gonna do a lot of bad examples here because I'm not very good at like understanding what these things are in terms of what the companies do. But I'm interested in the connection between like softening up core to DEI values and I think in the beginning, Bitcoin core developers were very what's the word? When you're when they weren't afraid of conflict. Let's just say that they were very disagreeable is the word, and they managed to somehow cooperate anyway. And I feel this DIY thing is a sort of a forced agreeableness upon the whole thing. I don't know. What are your thoughts around that?
That isn't what impacted me. I have been personally, I have felt very, very, very impacted by the DEI push. The number one issue for me for working on core has been a small number of people who are pushing, I wouldn't say purely necessarily for DEI, but that the result of they desired a social change in core that they then enacted. And the problem was that if you were not on board, see, someone like me was expected to support this. I wasn't going to be, at the time, I wasn't going to be the next maintainer because it was quite clear that at the time it was very desired for a female maintainer to be the next one or two maintainers. And in my eyes, it was quite clear based on many things I saw up close in person as well as in interactions on the repository and other things that the goal was to train up and groom a certain person who was chosen to be groomed as a maintainer at the time, probably the peer-to-peer layer. And then that person, at some point, another person appeared on the scene who was also chosen. And we were more or less expected to support and promote that and help market these people who benefited from immediate runway of funding, media coverage, podcasts, articles in the press. And I personally helped promote them because I was contributing for 2 years to Bitcoin Optech. And so I wrote articles that were favorable to their work. And then after 2 years of this, I realized that, hey, it took me a little bit of time because first I just wanted to become a contributor and find funding. And as I wrote to you, I had to be very careful and self-censor. And once I did manage to succeed and find my place, I became less and less comfortable with the role expected of me because I felt it wasn't the right thing to do. Didn't think it was a pure meritocracy if there were people who were chosen based on their relationships or based on their identity, who we were expected to support. And the problem got much worse than that. I can pinpoint the exact time when my Bitcoin Core prolific contributions came to an end when I was seen as, it happened on one specific pull request when I made a review that was, I believe, taken personally and caused a conflict with
Is
John
this
Newman.
is this in June 2021 by any chance?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pull request made by a meaty who at the time, I believe, it was pretty clear to me that she was being trained and groomed. She had much higher privileges on the repository than many other people did. And my review was just technical. It was not personal. And it led to a whole bunch of fallout because the trajectory of that pull request changed after my review because it was an area of code I knew well. And I realized that I was expected to social approve things that I didn't technically agree with and then if I did not, I was seen as not being supportive of the agenda. And the whole thing blew up. It came out that John was actually behind the pull requests because he was defending it rather than Meaty. And, or he took it on himself to, there was a sort of armor around these people when they were chosen. It was very risky for you. See, Meaty had a mentor who was the same AJ Towns. And so you would get John and AJ and also Fanquig on your case if you were not seen as supportive of these people sufficiently. And there was a sort of a tight group of, there was a phalanx of Roman soldiers ready to step in and protect these chosen people if you were not supported. And it all came to a head at that one pull request, which we could name.
And
That changed the course of my career.
So you mean they defended them because of their gender or because of their cultural background, and not on technical merit?
I think it was a mix of, this person was picked. They were assigned them a mentor, or a mentor would agree to come and help them. I think they were handpicked. Whether that was based on their gender or not, I mean, it looked that way. It looked that way because it didn't appear like the person was exceptional. The people they picked were not exceptional in other ways. But, how can you say? Maybe they just had a special relationship. Maybe they were mutual fans of each other. This is human. There are nuances. But the problem was the pattern kept repeating. And it was very clear to me that I had to be very careful. You were basically operating on a minefield. And that is still the case. It's just a little bit attenuated. But the PR in question, the pull request that changed the course of my trajectory working on Bitcoin, was Bitcoin Core pull request 22,245. And there was fallout from that. I mean, and Andrew H.L. acted, Peter Wheeler acted, Ben DeCarmen acted, Marco Falke acted, John Newberry acted. The whole list of the thing was going to be merged. Reacts, one neutral comment by Vladimir, the lead maintainer, more comments. And then I made one review comment. I didn't say knack or anything aggressive. I just suggested that this wasn't the right direction. And I got a bunch of private angry messages from John. He took me to the case to me on the Bitcoin board at IRC. Myself, as well as Vasil Dimov, as well as the lead maintainer Vladimir. And then after that, a bunch of people agreed with me. Suhas Dashjr, who was the expert in peer-to-peer, agreed with me. People started lining up with my comment, and the pull request was closed instead of merged after it had 5 acts by the most prolific contributors.
So
I got a shit ton of heat for that.
And what was the pull request about?
It was just it was a sort of a fine P2P stop sending send adder v2 message to block relay only peers. It was an area that I knew well for having reviewed it intensively, and that Vasil Dimov knew well because it was code he had written, and Vladimir van der Laan knew well because Vladimir had merged it. So so the 3 people who really knew it well didn't agree, and then everybody else aligned with my review. But my review bucked 5 acts by future maintainer and project owner H.L., by Peter Wheeler, who was also project maintainer and owner, Marco Falke, who was also maintainer. So 3 maintainers that already said yes. John Newberry said yes. Of course, it came out that John had actually suggested to Amidi to do this change. And so Amidi was just a proxy. And I think it came to light that a lot of that was going on, where basically John was suggesting things. The problem back at Chaincode that I saw was that we were expected to help people who were being, the hand-chosen people, we were expected to help them. And that came in the form of private requests to help understand Bitcoin Core technical details, or to help review code, or to help maybe help them figure something out with the code. And I asked around, and it wasn't just me, it was happening to the other residents who said, yeah, they asked me to, and they asked me to. And basically our role was to help train and support the handpicked people. But I didn't realize at the time. I just realized that after the months that came after that, nobody was funded except the handpicked people. And all the guys were just unemployed and wondering what to do, and there were no perspectives on finding funding. And I believe 3 people from that residency are still active on Bitcoin Core and funded now. But it took me almost a year, and the other 2, it took them literally years, maybe 3 years to find funding. And these guys are active today.
Huh.
But it was crazy the sacrifice you had to make at the time to find funding in terms of financial sacrifice. And so it was very blatant to the eyes of people who were spending a year, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years with no income. trying to make it work, that's really painful, my dude. That is super painful. That is fucking painful. And I say that with real feeling because I went from earning a lot of money to earning zero money. Because I was a senior engineer and technically working, saving assets at multinational corporations on intense missions that were very well paid, to being basically a free software open source developer. And we were watching as the hand-picked people would just glide right through with zero financial loss, zero drop in income from maybe their previous job, or maybe just straight out of graduation later on, right into funding with zero financial difficulty or sacrifice. And so, to my eyes, was relatively blatant. And I don't want to speak for the other people, but we were all discussing it. Like, we were sharing our difficulties that were experiencing in life, because here we are, we wanted to work on Bitcoin or Bitcoin Core or Lightning, as it were, depending on the developer. And there was no funding and no support, and we were all struggling. And so we were taking freelance missions and discussing and what we can do and supporting each other. And while the chosen ones just glided right through on the red carpet that was rolled out, and it was a little bit disgusting, to be honest. I mean, yeah, there is bitterness, and would I have done it again? Probably not.
And what
as much as it was my goal in life all I wanted to do in life was work on Bitcoin.
And at the did you apply for funding from Brink here? And did you get it? Or what happened?
It didn't exist until I think Brink was created the same year as that pull request I cited that pretty much ended my career in core. And I didn't explain how that happened, but that could be explained. But it marked a before and after, a very clear before and after. I was extremely prolific up to that point, and after that, everything changed.
And was that just the funding, or did you feel like
I was funded at that time by Spiral. That was called Square Crypto at the time. But then Brink was created a little bit after that. No, Brink was created before that, late 2020 or early 2021. And I had applied before that pull request that I cited. That pull request that I cited was in June 2021, June 14th. How interesting. That's my birthday. It was created on my birthday in 2021. So I think the week or two before that pull request, I had received word that from Jon again, that I was rejected. I did apply to Brink, and I was rejected. So the only two funding organizations ever rejected me, and thank you to all the other ones. Our Chaincode Labs that said no to me, and then later sort of said yes, and then but thanks to my working super hard, and then Brink. I applied to Brink, and Jon Atack said no.
But was it only the funding, or did you feel a motivational hit there, or like were you depressed by this whole thing? Is that why you became less prolific?
I started being funded in March 2020 after in my 13th month of working more or less half-time to full-time on Bitcoin Core. It was all I wanted to do. In my 13th month, I received my first funding with a grant that began with Square Crypto. At the time, it was $80,000 a year. My first grant was for $80,000 for 1 year. So definitely not in the upper echelon of core developer pay, but it was a start, and I could, yes, it was several times less than I was earning previous as an experienced developer. But it was something. And so I was already funded, thankfully, by that time. And Square Crypto, which became Spiral later on, did fund me for 4 years before dropping me. Some people within Spiral nowadays are not very friendly to me. So, yeah.
But did you feel less motivated after that? Like, what did you feel internally?
The most demotivating thing, as soon as you have even a little bit of funding to make ends meet, then it no longer really demotivates you until you see maybe someone else getting 3 times more who's also a new developer. Just because the red carpet was rolled out for that person and not for you. But it might be twice more, maybe 3 times more. Some people stacked grants very effectively. I was actually accused of being the record holder in stacking grants. I wasn't the first. I only did it twice, actually. Every other year of the 8, I was on one single grant, as I am currently, with OpenStats. And that is something I'd like to point out. I see a lot of people criticizing all of the funding organizations, cancel all the funding to developers on core. And I disagree with that. And I'd like to mention something. And this criticism does come from the, I would say the not or the BIP 110 side. They lump all of the funding organizations together, but they really aren't all the same. They are very different, in my humble opinion. So some are more independent than others. Let's say for the sake of, let's say there's a core orthodoxy. Let's say there's a core. These are the people we want core. There are some that will follow that orthodoxy, and there are others that are more independent, and happily so, and want to remain independent. And I would say the more independent ones would be OpenSats, notably, and perhaps HRF Foundation. They have their agenda. It's not so much tied to core as it is to other things, I would guess. But and then on the other hand, you have the more core-centric funding organizations like Brink, Chaincode Labs, and Spiral is sort of in the middle because Spiral has a focus on Lightning as well as on design. And so Spiral is sort of in its own category, but the core development side of Spiral is fairly core-centric as well. Whereas OpenSats has been willing for years, I believe, to fund a Notch developer. They have recently begun funding a Bitcoin developer to work with Eric Vossel. His name is Philip. And so that's a full-time grant to work on another implementation. And it's my understanding is that the only reason OpenStats does not currently fund a Knots developer is because they haven't gotten an application yet from someone who they felt was qualified enough to receive it.
Okay, yeah. So,
but OpenStats is, I think, clearly willing to support non-core implementations.
Yeah. I've seen first of all a thread from Vitalik Buterin back in 2014 where he explains why he didn't try to build Ethereum on Bitcoin because he was basically told to fuck off, and we don't want that here. We want Bitcoin to be money and simple and one purpose and stuff. And I think it's the Starkware guy I saw an interview with where he also says similar things, that a bunch of core developers back then didn't want that there. The narrative is sort of like, but now core is much more open and core is much more willing to innovate and all of this. And at the same time, you have this OpNet stuff and the Citria stuff and people building or basically doing shitcoin scams on Bitcoin, and it's like the attitude has completely changed with this. And do you think this is connected? How is this connected to the whole wokeness slide? And like, if it's not the funding, what is it? Why has the culture changed from like protecting Bitcoin as money to more shitcoins on Bitcoin?
Well, first of all, the people who were the chosen ones, that in my experience speaking with them, spoke much more highly of Vitalik and shitcoinery in general, or Ethereum, if you will, something than I would. I always consider Vitalik to be a bit of a soothsayer, playing the magic flute and the snake charming the VCs sort of thing. But that, if I said that to at least two of the hand-chosen people, the chosen people, they would very vehemently disagree with me, and they did. And some of my arguments with them were over shitcoinery and all that. I was definitely a Bitcoin only person. I always have been. I have zero interest in Ethereum. I don't really have a high opinion of the other ones, and so I'm certainly not an admirer of Vitalik, aside from that he's probably quite intelligent in his particular way, obviously, because he's very been successful with Ethereum to an extent. But that's not something I want on Bitcoin, nor something that I admire as a Bitcoin core developer. And so, look, a lot of this goes back to as I mentioned in my presentation at Plan B, selection criteria matters. And when you have an organization that is running the developer selection and training pipeline, the selection criteria they are using changes the way your organization will look. And there was a clear emphasis on a certain type of person. It was clear for years that the OG maintainers and project owners were either burning out as maintainers, wishing to step back as maintainers, or perhaps preferring to work more on their strengths like research. And so new people had to be found to pass the torch to, but the selection criteria for those new people obviously changes everything. And so if you select for people who are young, like shitcoins, from academia or from, big cities or blue cities or whatever sort of background, woke, friendly, I believe the people who were making the selection, John Newberry, did have what looked to me like a far left political leaning in his other Twitter profile. He did have another profile account, which I found looking him up. And I was like, okay, this guy is like radical left. But I didn't talk about it to anyone actually until now, because I was just keen on trying to on optimizing my ability to contribute. And so if you start attacking people, so I just noted and learned about it. And I thought, okay, this guy's pretty far left. And he chose Jonas. Was Jonas far left? Maybe not so much. He was into baseball. He was scouting baseball talent. But what do you do when you scout baseball talent? You're looking at youth. You're looking at young people. And so I think that came through. The goal was maybe that they were preferring certain gender, or perhaps they were preferring certain racial diversity. Maybe not. I'm not sure. Gender, I believe, was clearly the case. But they were also having preferences in age. They wanted youth. The wonderkin who was selected among the men was Antoine. Antoine was probably the youngest guy. He was, I don't know, 19 or something, maybe 20, 21, but he was very young. And, he was brilliant until he had his falling out with Chaincode, which I think everybody knows about. If they don't, they can look it up. He was also from France and a friend. And it made me very sad what happened between Antoine and Spiral, Steve Lee, Matt Corral, and between Antoine and his former employer, Chaincode Labs. But he was the brilliant guy of the residency, and Chaincode welcomed him. He was the only one, apart from the two women who participated, who got funding. And I've lost my train of thought.
No, but it's very interesting to me that like these dynamics, because I view the average pleb hodler as the red state shotgun pickup truck guy who wants to be independent and don't tread on me. And then you have the developer class that is getting more and more blue-haired the further down the wokeness the slide you go. And then you have...
And I found I found my train of thought. So if you're selecting for young people who want to live and work in Manhattan or San Francisco, or later on bring office London, you're definitely going to be excluding the people like, let's say, me, who doesn't want to be... I no longer want to be in a big city. I had my big city days in Paris. I did spend some time in New York City. But that's behind me now. You're excluding the guy with 3 kids who's married, who has a mortgage to pay, who's not going to up and move to the Chaincode Labs offices for a year. You're excluding the guy like me who would rather be in building a citadel in El Salvador or surfing in France. You're excluding a lot of people who... And so what kind of people are you left with? Well, I mean, it speaks for itself what you're going to get if you select for that. And so I got some pushback on Twitter from somebody who said, well, it's pretty odd that, someone who wants to make an office in El Salvador would be criticizing offices. Well, I no longer really think that I want to make an office at all, because I already have too much on my plate, and it's very hard to be productive already, especially in El Salvador. El Salvador is its own challenge. But if you were to make an office in El Salvador, you certainly would not be attracting the same profile of people as Chaincode Labs in New York and Spiral in San Francisco, wherever it is over there, or localhost in San Francisco, or MIT DCI in Boston, or London, where Brink is. I mean, these are completely different destinations and profiles.
Yeah, and then you have the third category, which is a lot of miners fall into this category, I think. Like, and these are my biases. I'm showing them to the world here, but and the VC funders that are just the Gordon Gekko types that are in love with money and just wants to make as much fiat gains as soon as possible. Right?
Yeah, and see, if your office is also in the US, where you have capital gains on Bitcoin, Chaincode Labs only pays you in dollars. They do not pay you in Bitcoin. Whereas funders like OpenSats and HRF, they, as far as I know, only pay or prefer to pay only in Bitcoin. So you're encouraging different kinds of people. If you have the developer in New York City who is paid 100% in fiat and who is in that environment versus someone in working remotely getting their grant paid in Bitcoin or in El Salvador or wherever they are, far off in the field, perhaps in some Bitcoin circular economy, you're definitely working more with people who use Bitcoin as money. Whereas in the US, you have the mentality of the digital asset narrative, the Bitcoin as an asset, which justifies the capital gains taxes because it's an asset, which, and I fear that we are more and more, even here in El Salvador, and I spoke about this yesterday with a friend of mine in the Bitcoin office who runs the Bitcoin office for Stacey, Mario, who runs also the 8i office. You know, I asked him, what, you know, I feel like the Bitcoin as money narrative is slowing down here a little bit since the IMF deal. I could be wrong. And everyone, the talk of the town at the moment is assets on Bitcoin, even here in El Salvador.
Oh, and it's awful because like I think this is the worry of the shotgun pickup truck pleb, and I would sort of represent that as like the family man who just wants to say fuck you to the government as much as possible. Like we are because we want to be responsible for our own lives, and therefore we get our freedoms because we earn it. Like that's why we are into Bitcoin. That's why any Bitcoin maximalist is into Bitcoin, in my view, because we understand money and we understand the importance of not diluting it and all of this stuff. And then you hear these horror stories about the blue-haired stuff in development, and of course it makes us super worried because you can be as knowledgeable as you want about computer networks. It doesn't say anything about how much you understand of economics. Like so I see a very big risk there, and I think that's why NOTS is at 20%, mostly because people are super worried that this thing has now taken. It has come to the point where the arrogance has taken over so much, and they act like they run the show now, and they can build whatever bullshit, like multiplayer online games on Bitcoin and stuff that will just make it worse as money. And to me, there are red flags everywhere in this, and it's just sad that it's gone as far as it has.
Well, yeah, to me, I mean, the op return thing, and I try to be not in any of the tribes, right? I consider myself relatively disenfranchised by Core. The Core no longer invites me, like they no longer invite Luke to the. There was a pretext that was used. It was a little bit bullshitty. It was used once, but now since it was used once, now I'm no longer invited at all. And I don't really consider myself part of the BIP 110 tribe either. And, you know, the other day I got a bunch of hate from Ordinal fans because the Ordinal's BIP was closed. But of course, they conveniently forgot that only 2 months prior, I was the one who closed the CAT BIP draft for reasons that I amply gave at the moment of closing it. So, you know, you go from being hated by one side to being hated by the other side. I got some backstage heat last week from my Plan B conference talk because it came out a week ago, and so that made some people angry. I got some heat from Core. I get heat from BIP 110 when I close the cat. I got 8 from the ordinals camp when the ordinals didn't move forward. I mean, you're going to be hated by everybody if you're trying to stick to your principles rather than sticking to a tribe. And maybe my principles are flawed, and maybe they, and I'm a very human person, but it's just what happens. And right now, I again lost my train of thought. I wanted to say that.
Oh, well, I can say thank you for closing the ordinals, Bip.
Well, I mean, it was obviously a shit show that nobody wanted to step in. The ordinals thing really is smelly because there's a few trolly accounts that go after you and say a bunch of nonsense on social media. And generally, I avoid responding to ankle biting and trolling, but I did respond a tiny bit, and I never am happy if I cede to responding. It's better just to ignore it completely. I ignored the cat stuff, the cat sniping at me. I ignored that almost completely. So sometimes I'm better avoiding responding to ankle biting and yapping.
I think the cat had mostly a trolly kind of thing to it.
Right?
It's like trolling back, sort of. I don't think.
I remember
was
you
that
and Giacomo
serious.
supported it, and
we just had so much fun with it. You posted pictures of a cat, and everyone on the other side went crazy. But you just said meow, and everyone went crazy.
But
so that was fun.
Back to back to my line of thinking. I do believe that op return was not by itself the reason. I tried to advise core to go gently or differently with this in a couple of core dev meetings. I was told that I was the problem for saying such a thing. I think some people considered what I said and agree with it, but by and large, it didn't go along with the collectivist angle. And core, for about 3 years, did have a collectivism that was named as such, collectivism, and I tried to push back on that in meetings, and I sort of met with, I was in favor of keeping things ad hoc and everyone having their own opinion and not having
named collectivism. They called it collectivism.
It was called collectivist action and collectivism, and I was like horrified privately when I read that during core dev meetings.
Rightfully so.
And I pushed back on that gently, saying, well, no, I prefer an ad hoc approach and everybody able to have their individual, and I was met with criticism for that. I don't recall the exact criticism, but basically collectivism was the word and collective action. And the signing of the declaration about mempool policy was one such collectivist action, which I refused to sign. I was asked in private to sign, and I gave my reasons for not doing so. But I believe that the op return, like I believe Giacomo thinks as well, but I've always felt from the start that the op return thing was not advisable. Technically, there may be good reasons to do it. Sometimes you can get away with doing something that has technical good reasons, but people that will make people upset. But you can sometimes manage to do it by doing it in a way that is maybe wise and not. But the way this happened was too provocative, and I think it should have been more consensual. It should have gone more slowly. It should have been less antagonistic. But we're not perfect. One could say, "Hey, you're a funny guy. You made people angry with your ordinals decision," or "Hey, you made people angry with the cat decision." So yeah, it's possible to step in any way while still trying to do things wisely. So it's impossible to be perfect, but I do believe that op return was the straw that broke the camel's back after a cumulative amount of things that eroded trust in Bitcoin Core, rather than just on its own an incident. And many people defending Core were defending it as if it was on its own, whereas to me it was just the one drop that too many. And trust in Core has been, in my opinion, been eroding slowly over a long period of time due to the many things that I've personally been seeing. And I have not even detailed them at all in this discussion. And there were points in my talk at Plan B that I didn't have time to get to, that I would like to cover perhaps in another podcast. We're probably not going to have time.
You can cover them right here if you want to. Like, what were you thinking of? Welcome to Knut's super awesome Bitcoin school. Should you use fiat money? Of course not. It's fake. It's counterfeited by the state, and you should buy Bitcoin instead. How do you buy Bitcoin? Well, you can buy them off a friend or you can go to an exchange. We recommend you go to bullbitcoin.com and buy them over there. They also got an awesome mobile wallet if you should ever want to use your Bitcoin. So go to bullbitcoin.com and use code Infinity for a discount. If you don't want to sell your Bitcoin, but you want to keep them for a long time, you should put them in some kind of cold storage. For that, we recommend BitVault. BitVault is a wallet that protects you against physical attacks, and they put your Bitcoin in a multi-sig time lock clever solution. So you should check them out at bitvault.sv and use code Infinity for a discount. To put your Bitcoin in cold storage, you also need a hardware wallet. We recommend the Bitbox. Bitbox is a great hardware wallet that has been around since forever. It's super easy to use, but also has advanced features, and it's privacy focused. So go to bitbox.swiss and use code Infinity for a discount. If you need further advice on how to do any of all of this, you should go to thebitcoinadvisor.com. They're our friends from Australia, and they're great. They have a multisig setup, a collaborative multisig, so that you can make sure that your descendants and your heirs inherit your Bitcoin when your time is due. So go to thebitcoinadvisor.com and use code Infinity for a discount. So to recap, get rid of the fiat, and remember, bullbitcoin.com, bitvault.sv, bitbox.swiss, and thebitcoinadvisor.com. Use code Infinity everywhere. And don't forget to brush your teeth. Over and out.
So my situation is a bit weird because if you see court, and I do, as let's say a royal court, maybe there's a king, maybe there's a queen, and then you have courtesans, and there's royal intrigue, and there are defenders of the throne. And at any given moment, I tend to look. I follow the processes quite closely, even when I'm not actively manifesting myself in review or pull request openings on core. I've been watching the interactions for 7-8 years now. And I really, it's quite clear in my mind, okay, this moment, this person is the defender of the throne. This person is the king. This person is the queen. This person is the king's advisor. This person currently has the king's ear. Of course, there are a couple, 3 kings, if we're going to be technical, maybe it's more of a commit bureau. But it's very hierarchical, and I was on the inside of this, and I was in the inside conversations where I saw how the process worked socially as part of the inner clique, but only as someone who expected to be a supporter. So, and then I sort of took my independence after that famous pull request when I realized my core life was pretty much changing drastically. I stepped down as Bitcoin Core Review Club co-maintainer. I stopped contributing to Bitcoin Optech because I realized that what I was expected to do was support the narratives. And I basically distanced myself from John Newberry because I saw things going on that I did not agree with profoundly in the way the open source project should be governed and should manage itself. I saw things that I thought were abusive and very unhealthy. And I don't want to use the word corruption. That's not the right word, but there were things that were very unhealthy for a software project. And I think that the smell, the tummy tests passed less and less for people. It just slowly got to the point where I think the operation was not by itself the issue, but it was just maybe the final straw for a lot of people. But that's hard to say because that's subjective.
Wasn't there a changing of the definition of op return that upset people also, like before the whole
but
blowing
all
up?
this is all downstream from the complete change of guard in core. The whole leadership and whose opinion had sway completely changed over the years, as all of the maintainers except the most recently named one stepped down. And the most recently named one handpicked their person, and then another person came, and then another person came, and the whole power structure changed. And there are things that I just don't recognize that are not core policy to me anymore. That I see just even this week, a pull request was merged that that the same unhealthy processes are still taking place, where it's behind the scenes people coming together it's not necessarily based on the right decisions for the code base or for the users. It comes down to friendships and cliques and connections. And this person was this person's maintainer. This person mentored this person. This person then mentored this person, and this person opened a pull request with a bad change. I didn't agree with the change, but their mentor intervened, and their mentors intervened, and the whole band gets together and socially pushes the change, in my opinion, in the wrong direction. For example, a maintainer literally said in the pull request merge this week, it doesn't matter if this breaks something, because my objection was that something was being broken, and there's no point in purposely breaking something that we could, with a one-line additional complexity, as they called it, keep backwards compatibility for, which I believe is extremely important. It was always the philosophy of Bitcoin that Bitcoin would always be backwards compatible as much as possible, unless there was an extremely if there was in any way easy to trivial to avoid breaking, then why would you break it? It was clearly easy to avoid breaking it, but the justification by the current, I would say, lead maintainer of Bitcoin Core, unofficially, certainly the most longest serving actual maintainer right now, was no, this would be breaking something more than 2 versions back. That's no longer supported by our security policy. And we anyway do not want to encourage people to continue running old versions of Core. So we should rather go ahead and break this thing to encourage people to upgrade to a recent version of Bitcoin Core, meaning V30, V31, and maybe still V29 for another few months. But as soon as V32 comes out, then it's just V30, V31, V32. My opinion is that is in no way a justification to break things that are trivially easy to not break. They literally took the position, let's break it, because we want to encourage users to upgrade. And I think that is not consistent with the way Core's philosophy was for a long time.
No, to me it sounds completely anti-Bitcoin ethos, all of it. Like
absolutely.
the reason
and
I fell,
users.
the reason
users, they got to upgrade.
Yeah, no. The reason I fell in love with this in the first place was that it was hard to change. That was backwards compatible to forever. So the people who just stacked and waited for 100 years would win in the end. Like, that's the beauty of the system. Like, that's the most crucial thing.
I don't understand breaking things needlessly that are trivially easy to not break. And in fact, there was a version of the pull request that had listened to me that did not break anything. And the maintainer came along and said, no, there's no reason to we prefer to encourage users to upgrade. Well, you don't do that by introducing breakage needlessly, even if it's minor. It was minor. The fix was minor and the breakage was minor, but it's silly. I don't understand that.
No, and it sets a precedent, right? For breaking more
things.
It's
on and on, over and over. These actions, when they accumulate, it doesn't look. It looks almost like it's about social process. Like, let's dunk on this guy again. And because I was more or less the code owner, I had written that code. I knew it as well as anybody because I had written it. It was in an area of the code base where I was probably the primary author at this point. All of my criticisms were overruled.
It's awful.
Yeah, I mean, the PR in question is 26988. It was just
26988.
Yeah.
No,
yeah. And 2 people, they didn't even review the code directly so much as they reviewed my review in order to dunk on it.
It's so scary, the things you're saying here, because was it this easy to change the culture? It's so depressing that it's so easy to just
it's group processes. It's group process. The problem is if a bunch of friends get together and socially support each other mutually on review, then and the people who were reviewing here weren't even habitual reviewers of this part of the code base, but because one person, the author of the pull request, was mentored by someone who was mentored in turn by someone else, and these people sort of got the band together, and just for that change.
So let me see. This is I made a thread like a month back or so, or maybe 2 months back, about the op return thing, just to see if you agree with this framing, because what I understand for the core argument was that it would be better if they did this shit on op return than anywhere else, basically. So therefore, it's good to open the policy, so it'd be easier to do that because it causes less damage. thing I got upset with, and I think most people did, was like this defeatist attitude that we shouldn't actively try to stop the spam. We should just make it less harmful and just accept that it's there. And that change of attitude is like, to me, that was the thing, because like, yes, if you live in a vacuum, like in an all else being equal scenario, you're right. It would be better if they just shifted to op return. 4 times more expensive for most of it, but just let's just say that every spammer was altruistic and put everything in op return. So the problem with all else being equal scenarios is that they don't exist in reality. So sending a signal that this is something that Bitcoin accommodates for and that Bitcoin is okay with, that I think pissed a lot of people off. That was at least that's what pissed me off. This is okay now for some reason. We shouldn't like try to fight it. And when these were clearly exploits and not monetary use cases. What do you think of that? Do you agree with that framing, or would you frame it differently?
So I think I understand Core's technical reasons for doing what they did. I also understand the position that culture matters and signaling matters. And I sympathize with both arguments. And there are times when I read, for example, there was a recent thread on Bitcoin/Meta where someone brought it up saying Core could still fix the rift, and a discussion ensued. And there were times where I would agree with both the pro-core and the opposite view, because there are good points on both sides. And I don't see it as black and white. I don't see it as core is right and the others are dumb shits. I don't see it as core is completely wrong either. I think there's nuance. I do worry about the shitcoinery. I do worry deeply about spam. I think one of the other most depressing period thing in Bitcoin Core, besides the DEI and the social power click processes, was the introduction of ordinals and the very high fees, and it seemed like there was nothing we could do. And I found that spam very depressing, because it felt like Bitcoin was changing from underneath us all. I don't understand, to be honest, how anyone could think that ordinals are good for Bitcoin apart from fee income, perhaps. But I think that's a short-term way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I'd like your take on my take about the minor fees also, because the way I see it is all has to do with time preference, right? So there's this narrative among the shitcoins on Bitcoin's camp that it's good for Bitcoin because miners make more fees. But to me, that's such a ridiculous argument, because like we're on, what are we now? Like if I go to Bitbo here, 885 exahashes per second. That's 885 followed by 18 zeros, guesses on the correct hash per second. Like, if we lost, like, every 99 miners out of 100, Bitcoin would still be as secure anyway, because it's like orders of magnitude more secure than it needs to be. And it's also like, it's like believing that Bitcoin cannot go up in value more. If it doubles in value every 4 years, the problem is not there. And I believe if it can keep on being money, it will do that at least until everyone on Earth is on board. I mean, it's such a weird argument, because like Bitcoin is not for the miners. Like the miners get paid by the users to secure the network and create block space for them, right? It's the other way around. The miners should be the employees of the users of the network. So it's such a nothing burger argument, the fee argument.
Yeah, I tend to agree completely. I mean, my focus is on users and people using it as money. And I thought one of the dumbest things I actually saw tweeted of the past year was "Your node does not matter" by someone who's trying to be clever, I guess.
Yeah.
But I place the user first and foremost. And at my Plan B talk, I gave a lot of suggestions on how the guidelines for governance or leadership of an implementation, if it was me. And I actually did have a private meeting recently with the new maintainer of Core, Sebastian Kong from South Africa. And to my surprise, I believe that he and I agree on a lot of the things that we would like to see. And we were both also inspired by the leadership style of Vladimir van der Laan, the lead maintainer for almost a decade of Bitcoin Core, who was an amazing leader of Bitcoin. And, when I say that I'm not into the woke stuff, that doesn't mean I'm criticizing, for instance, the transgender, the two transgender people, I believe, on Core are two of my favorite developers. So, it's not, I'm not against their choices. They do. I don't actually care if your hair color is blue.
No, and why would anyone care? Whoever they are, if they have the merit, then meritocracy is the most inclusive thing ever, because it doesn't care about your race or gender or sexual preferences or anything.
As long as the playing field is fair and everyone sort of gets the same rules and treatment. The thing that really gets my goat, maybe more than anything else, and maybe this is the personal weakness of mine, is I dislike deeply double standards. I deeply, since a child, dislike double standards. And,
yes.
And probably the main thing I would want, if I would strive for, if I was running an implementation, would be to try to diminish the double standards. And no one's perfect. I'll probably get it wrong. And maybe as BIP's maintainer, co-editor, I've gotten it wrong, but I really try to be fair. At least it's important to me. And I think that we've seen some really blatant double standards.
Yeah, but that's exactly what Bitcoin is about. Bitcoin is about equality before the law. If code is law, or really just the network is law, whatever, sound money is law. If we have fair money, then we have leveled the playing field and the same rules apply to everyone. That's what Bitcoin is for. It's exactly for that. It doesn't give a shit who you are. That's the whole point. So why would anyone give a shit who about the core maintainers gender or sexual organ?
Because in open source development, there is a thing. There is social capital. And even the README of the Bitcoin Core repository says that different people's opinion carries different weight depending on their social capital and contribution and amount of history with the project. And so there is social capital does matter. Everyone is not equal, and some acts carry more weight to maintainers than other acts do. That is how it works. But I still think that there are other double standards that really get to me, and not that one. That some people's act might carry more weight because they have more experience or they know the code better there. That's fine with me. But still, there's other kinds of double standards that, like things that you cannot change about yourself, like your age or your gender or where you're from, or how well you speak English. If you learn English as a second language and you say, hey guys, not knowing that, and having a US person reply, no, there's women present too. That's a silly example, but that isn't a real example that I saw a maintainer rebuke a non-English speaking developer for. I mean, I just would lighten up with the identity stuff. I don't give a crap what your hair color is, where you're from. These things should not matter. It should only matter how much time you spent working on the code and reviewing it, and your contribution to review and how good your review work has been. And just because you're hand chosen, but you've maybe reviewed several times less than someone else who was not chosen, doesn't mean, that's the kind of stuff that gets to me. There's some really blatant unfair stuff that's taken place over the years, and I really dislike that. And that's criticizable, and I'll probably be dunked on harshly for saying that, but that is something. I know there's so many things in my presentation at Plan B that I didn't get to that I could cover. I was taken to task about my comment that was maybe not very, very well said about how you had to be careful about reporting bugs in core because it depended who was the author of the bug and how they would see your relationship to them if you reported the bug, because they could see your bug report as being a personal attack rather than reporting a bug. And that really does happen.
But that's awful. You can't handle code like that. Of course not. Like,
but it's how that is how it happens. I found a bug. There's one example in 2021 in August. I found a bug. I reported on the IRC channel, and then I opened the fix, and it was a complete shit show because I had found a bug written by someone who took it personally, who thought I was attacking them for finding a bug. And the way it went down was very political and very sad.
It's the math is racist thing.
It was pull requests Bitcoin Core PR 22831. And, I was told, hey, it's not really a serious bug. Don't make a big deal out of it. And then I wasn't allowed to fix it because my fix, they didn't like the way I fixed it, or they didn't like my tests. To test it, I introduced a test to verify that it wouldn't break again. And a fix that didn't have any test coverage at all was preferred by the original author, who was very upset at me for finding that bug. And it's just one example of many. And that kind of thing just makes me sad.
That just sounds like it sounds like OCP, the organization, the corporation that builds RoboCop. If you remember the RoboCop movie, and that guy who keeps defending Ed 209, the robot that doesn't work and kills everyone, and he just refuses to fix the robot. That's what it sounds like to me.
It's funny. I stopped watching any kind of movie entirely after COVID. Real life was so much stranger than fiction.
Yeah. RoboCop was a couple of years before COVID, though.
Yeah, right. But the COVID thing was a real. It's like you also had a group of people who could continue going from office to office because they were jabbed and boosted, and those who were not doing testing and jabbing and boosting for 1 or 2 years could not visit the offices. They were. During the core dev meetups, they were in separate housing or separate meetings. I understand. I didn't even go. I mean, it really split core down, with the vast majority being in the camp of testing every day and testing all the time and being up to date with your boosters, your MNR.
Yeah, this reminds me of a Free Cities conference I went to after COVID. So it's the Free Cities Foundation, right? So it's not really a Bitcoin conference, or not at all a Bitcoin conference. It's about Prospera and Roatan, for instance. That's one of the free private cities around the world. They have this conference every year. And at that conference, there's a Bitcoiner in the board of the organization who had invited a lot of his Bitcoiner friends. I was there, and Daniel Prince was there, and a bunch of others. But there were also Ethereans and shitcoiners. And the funny thing is that they were still wearing masks, most of them. So all the Bitcoiners were, of course, unjabbed and not wearing masks. And the shitcoiners were concerned about the if people had boosters and wearing masks. And it was just an observation that was much more prominent for shitcoiners. There's something there.
Oh, yeah. It made me very sad that, I just stayed at home and worked and was productive, but it was a real shock to me the first time I went to a core dev meeting finally in 2022. How centralized interactions were. Most people in the room seemed to be people who were working together every day in offices and knew each other like as if they were in the same classroom. And these were people I almost never met. And of course, that very first and only core dev, I got doxxed to the FBI because the FBI asked the organizer of the core dev for all the identity of the participants because of the reported theft of Luke Dashjr's Bitcoin. I heard somebody say that Luke doxed everybody. That is false. I believe it was the FBI who requested the dox.
Yeah, and that's just speaking of Luke. In April 2021, there was a coordinated effort on the Bitcoin dev mailing list to remove Luke Dashjr as a BIP editor, a role he has had since 2012.
Yes, there was. I was at
what
that
happened
meeting.
there? Yeah. What happened? Newberry was involved. I know. Publicly endorsed it.
In the private OpTech discussions, they were all vehemently anti-Luke for some time. I don't think it's a secret. It's public knowledge, I believe, that David Harding very much disliked Luke, and because he publicly tweeted that Luke was a net negative on the space. And yeah, basically, I recall that I was there. Newberry called for Luke to be removed against his will by the project owners. Who could have done that? Well, Newberry called on the lead maintainer, Vladimir, to do that during the meeting. And it was an unpleasant and hostile exchange. And afterwards, I remember Vladimir refusing to do so. One thing I always respected about Vladimir was that he was a reluctant servant leader. He was reluctant to use or abuse his power to satisfy someone. And he did not give John Newberry satisfaction in calling for Luke's head, literally. And afterwards, I did have a conversation privately with Vladimir where I said that was intense. And he says, I don't know why he was so aggressive with me, but he was dumbfounded, I think, and a bit tired by the whole thing. When did you say that was? In July 2021?
No, April 2021.
Okay, well, shortly after, in June 2021, there was an equally aggressive exchange after the pull request that changed my trajectory on core. John Newberry on the IRC channel more or less went after myself and Vasil Dimov and Vladimir again. And Vladimir got tired of it, and he basically signed off IRC for 2 or 3 days. He disappeared. He's like, I'm done. And I was wondering how long until he would come back, because usually he was always present. But the aggression was coming to a head around that time. I think the peak, things are maybe a little bit better now. Every now and then, the power clique gets to get the band together again to do something not so cool. It's slightly improving. Like Giacomo talked with Walker on a podcast a day or two ago, where Giacomo said the DEI thing seems to be fading. Well, it's dying. If it's dying a slow death, it's a very slow death in court. In DEI, well, I don't know. I might be misusing the word woke, but I mean, it's going to take time. There's at least 3 key people I think that would still need to leave before things would really change. 3 or 4. And I don't know how long that will take. To be honest, I've been waiting for a very long time for things to improve. I believe the ship has sailed on my ability to contribute effectively now to Bitcoin Core since years, because basically since 2021, my ability was affected. And so I believe, like some other people, that we do need more implementations to welcome developers who are perhaps who don't have the same politics as the ones in Bitcoin Core, or who are not socially popular, or who just disagree on views on things. Right now, it seems to be very much dominated by Chaincode and Brink and a bit by Spiral. And localhost now as well, which is a newer one. I mean, one of the things that worries me is I've seen a few cases of people who I thought were very nice get hired by Chaincode, move to New York City, and change fairly significantly during their time in New York, become much less pleasant. And I don't know what goes on, but I've seen that multiple times now. And I have to wonder, why are these people changing?
Yeah, you would like to know the underlying mechanisms that makes this happen, because even if woke is temporarily dead, like, how do you make it not come back ever? What's the cure?
And when I say they changed, I don't mean they became woke, but I mean they maybe became much more aggressive.
Arrogant,
you start
maybe?
seeing them aggressively tweeting on Twitter, very aggressively, being very sensitive to replies and not letting things go, and just being, on the whole, much less pleasant people. And I don't know what happens if it's them being in contact with somebody specifically, or with the group in general, or if it's the environment of New York City. Maybe New York is a place where people are more aggressive. But wow, I mean, I know several people I've discussed this with. They say, yeah, that person was a nice guy, and then they went to Chaincode Labs and whoa, I don't recognize them anymore.
So you talked about more implementation. So then the natural question there is, why not knots then? Like, why not just what's wrong with knots?
the problem, I don't want to say there's a problem with knots, but for instance, I did mention that OpenSats has been willing to fund knots for some time. There are public posts on X by people like NVK or maybe Matt Odell, I'm not sure, on Nostr. But the problem is, my understanding is that they haven't actually received a good application yet. So Knots maybe is having trouble attracting developer talent. And that could be due to Luke being, look, I consider Luke a friend. I think Luke is very gentle and soft-spoken in person, much nicer in person, very nice in person, compared to the persona people might imagine when they just read only the posts on X, but maybe not the easiest person to work with. And I don't want to be criticizing of Luke. I like Luke, but there's also a lot of social. I mean, he looks very much like Luke's project to people, so maybe that's part of the difficulty, like a personal project. I think that the fact that Knots has gained so much market share. I mean, how many Knots nodes do I have right now? My node
around 20%, right?
My node right now has like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 knot spheres, at least with knots in the subversion, out of around 12, 15% in my personal node at this moment, but it varies.
Mm-hmm.
So knots has gained market share. I think not so much because, I think it's more because of Core. Core has been the best marketing for knots. And not Core altogether, but I would say 2 or 3 people behaving like absolute assholes for Core on Twitter or X. I think they're doing great marketing. I mean, okay, Knots has much better memes. I'm not on the Knots side, but Knots definitely memes much better. There are some Core devs who are wannabe memers who cannot meme.
What's the main reason that you're not on the Knots side then? Like, is there a technical reason?
I mean, look, I consider Luke a friend. And I believe that they would be very happy if I would dedicate my time to contributing to Knots. But I believe that I'm not quite fully on board with the way Luke sees everything, similar to the way that Giacomo was not fully on board. And I believe that BIP 110 is not quite what I think needs to be done. I would be more comfortable working on or perhaps co-maintaining a fork of Core with perhaps different types of developers, maybe more older, maybe not in the big cities, maybe more Bitcoin is money people who are married, who are mature, who have kids and responsibilities, and who are not leading with their youthful ambition and ego to make changes to Bitcoin. Maybe a bit more of a conservative, slower. Maybe it would pull in some things that Core is doing, but maybe more slowly, conservatively, with a bit more another review layer. I think we do need another implementation that is for developers who don't fit into the current Core mold that has been engineered.
All right, yeah. I mean, Luke is a very special person, and I don't agree with a lot of his views, but I do agree with most of his views on Bitcoin. And I do think that he's a very trustworthy guy, and or a guy that holds integrity very high, even though he might...
Absolutely. And even Adam Back once tweeted a couple of years ago, I believe, that you should be very careful if you find yourself disagreeing with Luke on something, because
exactly,
that Luke has been right.
Yeah, and for that reason alone, I find this like pushing him out of Core to be such a, like, what are you doing? Like, this is your most senior guy, like one of the most important people for Bitcoin ever. Like, everyone agrees on that. So it's like, how can you get to that?
Yeah, he's class of 2011, along with Vladimir van der Laan, Peter Wille, and Matt Corallo. These 4 people, and I think Luke was the first. At least he was among the class of 2011. He hasn't been that active on Core over the past half decade because he's also been busy working on Knots, ocean mining, Datum. He's got a lot on his plate, right? And that's why he also BIP's maintainer, BIP's editor. He's the OG BIP's editor since 2015, I believe.
Yeah, and to be clear, like I'm pro knots and I'm pro BIP 110. I've stated so publicly. Mostly for the middle finger of it all. I admit that I have no problem with, in hindsight, if it doesn't work or if it becomes a nothing burger that I risk my reputation or anything like that. I'm passionate about Bitcoin and I'm passionate about what I think is best for Bitcoin, and that's why I want to send a message, a temporary message, that we won't take this. Like, we're not going to take it, the Twisted Sister thing. Like, but having said all that, I still think the more important thing there
Twisted
is that.
Sister. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. The more important thing there is datum and the fixing the centralization of mining.
Decentralizing mining, absolutely.
That's paramount. Like that's the big one, and it sort of gets overshadowed by this other debate, of course. And
well, I think a lot of plebs are on board with you. They're unhappy with the new core that was, let's say, socially engineered a bit by the selection criteria of the developer pipeline, Centralized in Chaincode Labs, developed by a very small, less than a handful of people. And that has led to a situation where the plebs feel very alienated, and there's definitely a chasm between the new core, maybe not the new maintainer, but some of the loudest voices of the past 2 years in core has definitely been a complete chasm with the users due to the selection criteria being centralized and so on. Of course, all of that is heavily criticizable, and I'll surely be dunked on very harshly for what I've just said. But it's still a fact, and you reap what you sow when it comes to your criteria of selection for your new developers. And core has also faced a shortage of new talent lately. They've had trouble recruiting new people to core.
Yeah, and
so I mean, there are knock-on effects when you go woke. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that core when they say you go woke, go broke. Well, I think right now it's not so much in fashion as it was back in 2020, 2018, 2019 when the blue mat was calling for diversity. And behind the scenes, core is still that way. They're still reaching out and looking for certain profiles and identifying and tapping people to be chosen. Whereas people who might be Bitcoin maximalists naturally aren't necessarily the profile of that the Chaincode Labs people are reaching out to and looking for.
No.
And that's been that way since a long time.
Yeah. No, it's a mess.
Well, it just needs... We just need probably another implementation, which is way easier said than done. And that's probably why we don't have one. And now we're in the bear market. So funding might be a little tougher than it would have been 6 months ago. But yeah, Giacomo evoked it. I believe we need one. We need a place for people who don't fit into the current Bitcoin core mold. Now, it's not a uni mold. There are very good people in core. I believe that currently, I like all of the maintainers in core right now, except one. I think they have very good maintainers. There's just one who I know is hostile. And, core could come around, and I hope they do. My goal is not to punch down on core the way core has sometimes punched down on me. My goal is to help improve Bitcoin. I'm on team Bitcoin.
No, and of course that would be preferable, but aren't we beyond that point?
Well, it does seem like the ship has sailed, but, never say never.
No, because they did put this on themselves. Or would you agree with that this BIP 110 wouldn't exist had core not meddled with the policies and made decisions that nobody liked?
I think that they were not deft in the way they did their change, and I think that change alone would not have caused the issue that it did if they had not been losing trust over years.
Yeah, but weren't the
cumulative action?
Yeah, so it was the straw that broke the camel's back, or whatever it's called.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So, but still, that it was the straw that would break the camel's back would it seems so obvious that if you do this, there will be consequences somehow.
Right? To you and to me, yes, but not to my colleagues.
No, but to Bitcoin, like they did. If now the change was made to to make spam a little less destructive, and people didn't agree with that, then they're taking one thing for granted, but they're only seeing one chess move ahead and not two. Like, if this leads to that, then that's a worse outcome. If you're taking this utilitarian approach, like, why can't you have a lower time preference and see a little further into the future that this will trigger side effects that are even worse than what you're proposing, like from the core perspective? Because I don't think anyone in core likes that BIP 110 is now on the table and there's a risk that it will happen.
I think it's a byproduct of the social process. When the main decision making is taking place over a lunch discussion in an office in New York City or London, then you're not going to probably come to the same decision as someone who is interacting much more with the plebs. I believe that there is an environmental factor involved, where they're all sitting around between themselves. And when I was visiting Chaincode Labs, there was definitely an elitism. There's an absolute elitism going on. And I think that's a byproduct of the social process. Like, I'm here in El Salvador. Who do I meet in El Salvador? I meet plebs. Who comes to El Salvador? I mean, yeah, every now and then, you come, or Luke comes, or Giacomo comes, or Peter Todd comes. Those are probably the main developers I see here. I saw Merch here once, and Merch takes a lot of crap for his core, his argumentation for core. But Merch is someone who I like very much and get along with. I have a lot of respect for Merch. He's someone I can discuss with. And we've had calls where we've had heart-to-heart talks with Merch. So, one day Merch is getting heat for defending the core position. One day I'm getting heat for closing the cat. We all have our days of heat, but there are some very good people in core. I'm not criticizing. I would say 90% of people in core I like very much. It's not that they are all woke. It's just that there was an element that sort of took it over in a way. And it's not just the developers, it's also the handlers, the people in the offices who are sort of deciding things like, who will we hire into our office? Who's going to get funding? And I said that as someone who also influences funding decisions since about a year. I help open stats review applications. But I'm just one opinion on a subcommittee or two. So I'm not the head of Brink or Chaincode or local hosts. But I think it's good to diversify the funding organizations, and I think it's good to diversify the implementations so that there's a space for different people to feel welcome. We have to deal with the fact that Bitcoin is on a collision course with a vast number of normies and with Wall Street and with politics. And that is responsible probably for a lot of the narratives that we see nowadays that are not Bitcoin is money or supportive of Bitcoin is money. But I hope that we can still come around, because I do want to use Bitcoin primarily as money. And in my node, I don't want to store a bunch of other people's spam. And if you're a node runner, it seems like you naturally don't want to unless you have a limited bandwidth and resources. I did have to start turning my node at one time on my laptop because it only had 1 terabyte of SSD. That's not enough nowadays. So,
no, and this is a forever problem. Then that's why I'm so one of the main reasons why I hate it so much is like it's what do you call it? Like they're squatters.
Yeah, it's a free rider problem.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a problem of abuse, of pissing on the commons to make money for your stakeholders. And that's not Bitcoin to me. Human nature, people get into Bitcoin initially about greed.
No. Not make money for your shareholders, make fiat for your shareholders. And that's the saddest part. They're not making actual money. And this is the it drives me mad. Like, here you have the best fucking thing in the world that can benefit everyone on earth forever. And you choose, so like, no, I'm gonna be that guy from the Matrix who chooses the stake instead.
Yeah,
like,
but making fiat money, that's the gate, that's the entry gate. I mean, when I made friends with the police that the neighbor tried to have me arrested by, what they wanted to know was like the same as everybody else. So tell us how we can make more dollars with Bitcoin.
Yeah, and it's so sad because like this is the tool to they're all having tough lives because of fiat. So everyone's life is tough because of the fiat monetary system. This is the fix.
So few people see that, right? People,
Yeah.
they're busy with their lives. They're not like you and me, most people, thinking about these things. We're a fringe, and we're on a collision course with the entire world that doesn't care about these things that we care about. And it's going to be a challenge.
No, so and that's why I think the education is crucial, and especially education about why scams are scams and why you shouldn't fall for them. There is no such thing as a non-fungible token. There is no token on the internet at all, in fact. Like all data is copyable. The Satoshi is sacred and special for very different reasons. It's because they live in your head, not on the internet.
It indeed makes me sad to see good, smart, intelligent developer talent working on stuff like that rather than... And that's part of the reason why I think that it can be a mistake to prioritize for youth, because youth is very good for innovation and energy and ego and ambition. But then if it's channeled into making shitcoin and tokens and things like that, rather than making the main priority for me is just making the base layer robust. Having a robust base layer, having a robust Lightning network, robust second layer for payments. Robustness. It's not about, I'm not particularly interested in all the rest. But, that's maybe boring to a young person, but I'm not so young. I'm probably the oldest person in Bitcoin Core. And I just care about it as money and making it robust and as robust and as decentralized as we can. Robustness and decentralization. AJ Towns wrote that on a blog post several years ago. AJ got that full on 100% right. Robustness and decentralization. That's where Bitcoin shines, and that's where my attention is. And decentralization of funding developers, of mining, and making it possible to run nodes as cheaply as possible. So don't burden everybody with a bunch of crap on their node. I mean, Core was good at that with the block size war in preferring to keep things light for the node users and blocks smaller. So yeah, there's definitely been a bit of a change in narrative by necessity or by other means, but it's concerning.
Absolutely. I saw in one of the launch posts for one of these shitcoins on Bitcoin things, I think it's OpNet, that the article said that there are so many sats just sitting there doing nothing. And it reminded me so much of Christine Lagarde saying that there are so many, big piles of euros in people's savings account that are sitting there doing nothing, and we ought to do something with them. That's what they want to do. They want to steal your... No, this is the thing that people don't get about money. It's never idle. It always provides its holder with a service. Saving is a use case. It is, in fact, the most important use case. That's how it fixes store of value. Like it's so crucial.
And it provides proper incentives and peace of mind and ability, freedom, and freedom is important.
And that whole it's creeping in that is not important anymore. And it's so sad, and it's sort of with the stable coins thing. What I dislike about that is like the narrative is that it's this necessary bridge into the other world, and we can bank the unbanked and stuff. But to me, like if fiat is smoking, then stable coins are nicotine patches. But if you want to quit nicotine, then you should use sats instead.
Yes.
You see what I mean? It's a substitute for, but you're still addicted to this drug, so it doesn't fix the problem.
And I believe that developers, it's healthier if Bitcoin developers are funded in Bitcoin rather than in fiat.
Of course.
And what that presupposes more of them not being in the United States, where you cannot use Bitcoin really without capital gains on every defense.
Well, you can if you're ballsy enough to give the finger to the government and not give a crap.
Right. But, I was actually made an example of by Jonas once in his blog of saying how things can go very wrong when your funding is in Bitcoin, and that it's probably a bit safer and wiser to have it in fiat. And my funder at the time, Square Crypto, later became Spiral, did begin proposing to me to take dollars instead of Bitcoin. I wouldn't be where I am today with this Citadel if I had been accepting dollars.
It's so no, and this it's so sad that you're so unique in doing that. Like the
I'm not. There are other developers, but definitely the ones in the New York City office are obviously not being paid in Bitcoin.
No, and that in itself is such a humongous red flag. Like, you don't believe in this revolution.
Nor are the ones in the local hosts in San Francisco. I don't know about the Brink office in London. I do imagine, though, that you could probably ask Brink to be funded partially or all in Bitcoin. It's surely possible, but how are you going to use that Bitcoin if you're in London, New York, or San Francisco? Whereas if you're in the global South or some other countries where there are circular Bitcoin economies around the world, there's just not very many Bitcoin developers in those places.
No, and it's so sad, like, because if you now, by your action to accept fiat instead of Bitcoin, show that you don't truly believe in this revolution, then shouldn't you like that to me is the biggest red flag ever. Like, if you're working on Bitcoin and you do not accept Bitcoin, what do you even Bitcoin, bro? Like, what are the other incentives?
I think it's the condition of the funding organization is imposing fiat, not that the developer is preferring fiat. But it's hard. It's case by case, of course. But I'm aware of cases where the funding organization doesn't propose Bitcoin.
No, and I'm not trying to.
Whereas, thankfully, ones like HRF or OpenSats, and I believe Spiral did fund me entirely in Bitcoin the whole time, 4 years.
Yeah.
So it is possible, but sometimes you have to ask for it, even push for it. OpenSats and HRF, no. OpenSats or HRF, they are all Bitcoin. That's it.
Yeah,
you want to be paid in something else? Go pound sand. You're getting paid in Bitcoin.
Yeah. no, but I mean, the whole thing, it just stinks. I'm sorry, but to me, it's like, it's very saddening to hear that the fiat mindset is like everywhere. And I do understand that people live in the real world, and people with guns will come and take them if they do something illegal. So there's that. It's sort of the same thing as the defeatist attitude with op return. Like, that doesn't mean you give up. In my world, it shouldn't lead to anyone giving up. So, Jon, we've been going on for 2 hours here, and I absolutely love this conversation. Is there anything more you wanted to add to the whole your talk in San Salvador, the points you missed there?
Well, that could go on for a lot, but
it's not every day I have you on, so I have nothing against that.
So yeah, I mean, I'm really not interested in drama. And so I don't really like these topics. But at the same time, in general, I see plebs feeling something is off, and there's a lot of speculation on social media. And my impression has been that people will speculate because they don't know. And I don't say everything I know. I have to hold back quite a lot, unfortunately. And I'm not interested in gossiping about this stuff. But I think it's important for people to know what really took place or has taken place and what is still taking place, to have a more informed view of what really has been behind the scenes. So my presentation tried to cover some things, and I think we should link to my slides in your podcast if you're willing to.
Absolutely.
A few quick points from my slides. I talked about the selection criteria being an issue, the leadership transition. Why are the new developers not cypherpunks and sovereign individuals and citadels spread around all over the world, rather than being in few offices? There is a myth that the maintainers are just janitors following the reviews, merging things that have had enough review. That is not entirely true. There are dynastic effects because maintainers tend to stay a very long time, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, sometimes 10 years, sometimes. And there are real social processes that are affected by when you become a maintainer, things change, and dynastic effects I believe that I did believe that for core, it would be a good idea to turn maintainership to more of a jury duty, where you don't write code, where you're not responsible for a project, where you just review and serve others for a limited time, and then you go back to your life as a regular contributor. The way politics should be. I had an uncle who was a congressman. He did 2 terms. He realized that for his 3rd term, he would have to make too many compromises to donors. And so he set back to private life to keep things sane and healthy. And I think it would be healthy for core to think about that. But at the same time, if you have several implementations, then perhaps the diversification could be, perhaps the maintainers would be okay if you had a strong leader like Vladimir in place for a decade, if they're a good, humble, wise, servant-oriented leader. As long as you have different implementations offering users choices and options, then perhaps you could have someone long-term in place without jury duty regular rotation. But if you only have core that is 95, 96, 98%, as it used to be before NUTS increased recently, then I believe it should have some sort of regular rotation of maintainerships to avoid dynasty effects and power clicks forming. How maintainers are chosen in core, to be quite clear, it is not a vote of the core developers. They are chosen, from what I've seen quite clearly, by the existing maintainers, often by a proposal from one of them, and a strong veto from one of them could be enough to disable a nomination. So in core, the maintainers are chosen by the maintainers, with perhaps input from the project owners who are no longer maintainers. Project owners are the only people above maintainers in the core hierarchy. They are the owners of the GitHub repository. As far as I know, there are 4 of them. 2 OGs and 2 newer ones. In core, one thing that I was quite worried about these past few years has been an increasing level of opacity in the communications. It used to be that we had very good public IRC meetings once a week with Vladimir as the lead maintainer running the meetings. He was such a good meeting leader in coming to decisions in real life with intelligent, honest, humble conversations often to come to a conclusion during that same meeting and to arrive at something. Since then, working groups were created. These are private groups that communicate privately on Signal. You have to apply to be admitted to them. And that's where the real communication takes place now, in these silos, where someone like me who is watching from outside cannot see what communication is taking place. So the communication has become less public, it's gone private, and is siloed. And I find that personally worrying. So the private working groups have replaced public discussion in core meetings. Code of conduct. The core adopted a code of conduct that if I recall correctly, was written again by Jonas of Chaincode Labs. And I was I believe the first reviewer who came out who reviewed that pull request, and I was not in favor of a code of conduct. I've never been in favor, and if I was running an implementation, I would try to avoid one as much as possible. Core went just fine without a code of conduct for more than a decade. 2 dedicated moderators were named. They're good. They do a very good job. They're good people. I like both of the moderators who work for Core, but they are unfortunately caught between a rock and a hard place, because the way they are used is, if, for example, I would make a comment that might be misinterpreted personally by a maintainer who then asks the moderators to investigate it, who then come and investigate me over it. And I say, no, it wasn't a personal thing. And I would remind the moderators that when in doubt in written communication, such as in open source development, you by default must assume the most charitable and generous interpretation of what somebody wrote, rather than assuming the worst, unless proven so.
Innocent until proven guilty.
This is a basic rule. And the moderators were, yes, you're right. And I'd see. And so the maintainer who told you to go after me for my comment was assuming the worst rather than giving it a generous or normal interpretation. So they're between a rock and a hard place. Basically, the code of conduct is used to protect the powerful against the weak, when it really, in my opinion, should be used, if at all, to protect the weak against the powerful. But that's how rules tend to be.
Yeah. The code of conduct sounds like politicization to me. Like it's politics creeping in. Yeah.
This came from the introduction, the creeping of woke into these open source projects. So it comes back to, we need alternative plans with different politics. Maybe we can have a woke one. Maybe we can, then we can have a one that's maybe more just older, conservative, seasoned people who aren't based on anything related to their identity. We don't care what country you're in. If you have 2 kids or 4, what color your hair is, or anything, doesn't matter. What matters is your work. There's a perennial lack of the perennial constraint in Bitcoin core protocol development has been a lack of experienced reviewers. People always cite the most frustrating thing to them as being, my work doesn't get reviewed, it doesn't move forward, there's no good review. And so I've seen it argued that we shouldn't have more implementations because that would disperse the reviewers across the already resource we're lacking against or more projects instead of concentrating the rare review talent. I disagree with that because in core, I've seen very good, experienced, seasoned reviewers be disenfranchised just because they're more independent. And then we see what, like I mentioned earlier in our discussion, where people are coming in not to review the pull request or the code, but just to review the reviewer, to dunk down on their review, to make it possible to ignore their review or to push it aside. I believe that there are people who are very good reviewers in core who are underutilized because of the social processes, because they're not in an office, they're not in the popular group. Maybe they are one guy alone in Eastern Europe or one guy alone in Central America, and so on. So there are double standards, and there's ongoing social signaling of approval and disapproval, who should be supported, should be supported, who is in, who is out. That is maybe inevitable in human processes, but it wasn't quite as bad when I first joined core as it became later. So I have a list of, in my slides, starting from slide 49, named culture, I have 4 pages of what I would consider to be the guidelines for an implementation. And at the end of the day, really having one single dominant client creates monopoly risks. It stifles developers who are not in the group. It stifles development. Maybe we could have one. It's going to get harder with more implementations to introduce soft forks, probably. I could imagine, but maybe we're going to have one implementation that does launch CTV or covenants if the people want that. One that does not launch something like BIP 110. I am not certain how it will help or hinder innovation having more clients, more implementations. But having only one is clearly seen by, I think, a growing part of the community as being an issue.
But
they need options.
I mean, more options is always good, right? And it's sort of like countries having to compete for talent. If you have more,
as long as you don't introduce a less resiliency with the consensus rules, as long as they follow consensus properly and don't have critical consensus flows. But you're right. I agree that more implementations will have more network resilience, fewer single points of failure like we do now, more available choice, and it will incentivize Bitcoin Core to improve.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but if they're not in consensus, they're a shitcoin. They're a fork, right? By definition.
Yes, but you want basically on part of the reasoning behind the kernel isolation project in core has been to have a single kernel that other implementations could use while innovating elsewhere, but they all use the same solid, robust kernel. So the most important rules, and you followed all the consensus ones, but as long as the client is following that, then they should be free to innovate in other things, perhaps. But overall, I think the main thing is to offer more choice and to encourage Bitcoin Core to be more careful about what it does if it's more likely to lose market share. Right now, Core, my understanding is that Core is having problems recruiting new developers. That could be wrong, but that's what I've heard. So Bitcoin maybe is not as much in fashion at the moment. Or maybe it's just Core is not as much in fashion. I don't know. But developing and training not only new users, but also more developers is going to be important. It always
Of
has
course.
been.
Yeah.
And it's going to, and we have to be very careful and vigilant about where the developers are being trained and educated, so that it's not just one centralized place in one city.
No, and maybe not with emotional Fridays or whatever. That like maybe we should have trained at another school that doesn't focus that much on feeling Fridays.
Yeah, I mean, if you do have feelings Fridays for one implementation, as long as like you have 3 or 4 implementations that sort of have roughly equal market share, I think that's fine.
Guns, steak, and cigars Fridays for another implementations, please.
Feelings Fridays, guns shooting Fridays.
Guns and steak Fridays. Yeah.
I'll disappoint you all. I don't have any guns in El Salvador, but you know, we have also AI is coming, and that's a real topic right now amongst the core Bitcoin developers in general, is integrating AI. And that's a whole other thing.
Oh yeah. That's a whole nother box to open.
Oh my. So
anyway, how is life in El Salvador? By the way, you still enjoying yourself immensely? I mean,
I love El Salvador. I
Yeah.
love it here, but I mean, it's a challenge. It's cost me a lot of money. It's cost me a lot of time. It's kind of like moving to working on Bitcoin Core. Would I do it again? Knowing how much it costs and how much time it took to become a core developer. The same could be said for El Salvador, but it's very compelling if you're a freedom lover. I don't know how long the freedom window will remain open, or maybe we will all get rugged. I do worry that the government will introduce property taxes and rug all of us people who've been investing in land.
Yeah.
That would be terrible, because a lot of I think the value of the land here is coming from A, the security, the safety, and B, the lack of property taxes, which could change. And I am worried about that. I think there's a real risk of the safety could go away. Maybe the CIA breaks open prisons. I mean, tinfoil that. Or the property taxes could be introduced, and that would be honestly very sad.
I would say that, but both those count as the safety going away.
Yes, and so you don't know, and it's actually, I've never invested so much in my life outside of work in terms of time and money as I have here.
No,
but at the same time, it's pretty cool here. I mean, there's a lot to love.
And, it's beautiful up there. I mean, where you live. I thoroughly enjoyed that afternoon where I got to see your house and get all sweaty. And we had to exchange. I had to leave my shirt and get a T-shirt from you because my flight
and your
was.
Hat.
Yeah. My hat is still there, right?
I still have your hat. I still have your shirt. They're waiting for you.
If I know you correctly, they're still hanging on that ladder, right?
No, they're hanging on something else.
All right, but that's good to hear. And I'm so sad that I didn't get to go in November here, that I couldn't make it to El Salvador. But
Plan B. You didn't come for Plan B.
No. It turned out. My bad. It turned out my passport's expiry date had an expiry date. So the expiry date was like 5.5 months after my planned return flight, so they wouldn't let me over there. And I was at the airport and all stressed out, of course, like having this thing planned, and I didn't want to let people down. I showed them pictures of me and Bukele and stuff, and like, let me get to us. Just let me fly there, and I'll sort it out while I'm there. I'm sure I can sort it out. But no, they wouldn't let me on the plane.
I have to say, I'm jealous of you and Giacomo. You guys got to meet the president. I still have not met the president.
Yeah. Oh, I'm being called a hypocrite all over the internet because of that. Now I'm a statist cuck now because I went to dinner.
You're a statist cuck.
Of course, yeah. No, that was interesting for you. It was my second presidential dinner, if you count the president of Madeira.
Well, you'll be coming next November, then, I am sure.
For adopting,
or for next Historico something.
Will there be a Historico next year or this year?
I assume there will be, because they're launching the same thing but with AI in April.
Oh, fantastic!
I mean, the Bitcoin office is impressive because, you know, I try to help the Bitcoin office frequently, and they're impressive at how much they're able to do with little. They don't have a big budget or anything. I mean,
No.
Bitcoin historical did look like it had a decent budget, but in general, they're operating on a shoestring. And it's amazing the innovation they're trying to introduce to El Salvador compared to some other organizations in the government that maybe are very well funded or much better connected or more close to the center of power. And the Bitcoin office are just doing so much stuff with so little.
Yeah,
it's great. Amazing. Yeah. I didn't know Max and Stacy before, and the more I work with Stacy, the more there is to love. It's amazing.
No, she's definitely a doer. And she makes things happen. And thank you very much, Stacy, for inviting me to Historico.
Yeah,
and making all of that
incredible.
Happen. I'm doing a lecture for Kubo Plus on Monday, actually, online. The second one. Yeah. So I already did one, which was an interesting experience, like between 50 and 100 students or something. And they were all, they didn't have their cameras on. So it's just random anonymous faces. And I'm like, okay, what do you want me to talk about? And it's just silence as all right, I'll talk about this then. And I just went on ranting for an hour or two, and they seem to enjoyed it.
That's great. Well, now the world knows that we collaborated on your first book.
Yeah, and I'm so glad we got to get that story out. Maybe in yet another revised edition, I can put your name in the book. I'm eternally grateful for that. It sure made me a better writer and a better Bitcoiner. So once again, deep thanks, and all the love in the world.
Well, I hope to see you soon.
Yes. Before I let you go, Jon, is there anywhere on the internet where you want to send people, anything you want to direct people to?
Buy my NFTs and JPEGs. You can follow me on X if you want to. That's about it.
Yeah, and yes, that's very advisable. Jon Atack, thanks so much for doing this, and I hope to return to El Salvador as soon as possible and have a ceviche or two with you, and maybe hop on your motorcycle again. That was adventurous.
Come out and visit the Citadel. Absolutely.
Yeah, hopefully I can bring my family one day too.
Fantastic.
I love El Salvador. It's fantastic.
Yes, sir. See you soon then.
Yes, thank you. This has been the Bitcoin Infinity Show. Arrivederci. See you.
See you.